jobs lost in the economy. That's more and more people's greater inability to service their loans. That's more and more stress on government finances. But the real issue where it hits, because that's a link to it for us, is our financial system. If for poor countries it's food, for us what it means is we absolutely cannot pay off our debt. Because the economic growth, rather than rising to help us service an already unserviceable debt, goes down and people see it. But it just doesn't do it for us. It does it for Germany. It does it for China. It does it for every other country linked into this global system that we referred to, of which we were just a finger. So that we have the more growing risk of a financial shock. Debts cannot be paid. Now, if debts can't be paid, it means banks are insolvent, because they've lent all your money out. If you look at a bank balance sheet, they've created all of this money as debt. It's in the system. You all think you have money in the bank. If you all go to the bank tomorrow and say, give me my money, they do not have it. They have about 3%. Everything else is out there in the economy. The only way we can pay off our debts is if we take all your money out of all your positive accounts, all everywhere, and pour it back in, and still money in the system. So it means our banks become at greater risk of being insolvent. It means you might not get your money. It means government finances fall apart, and it's global because we do not live on our own as an island of Ireland. As an example, I just want to say something about sort of how the election, or prior to the election, our discussions about Ireland's debts, because it is illustrative. One of the reasons people say that we want to default on some of our debt, absolutely reasonable. We can't pay it. This is what we should do. The problem is that, like dominoes toppling, once a certain number of dominoes start and spreading out, you know those complex things that people set up, those domino trains, where it starts off as a single line, then you hit here and here, and it starts bifurcating, going out in all sorts of different ways. Once that process gets to a certain point, the problem starts to go into all sorts of different directions. You can't stop it then. Other things take over. It becomes too complex. What happened in the US in 2007-8 was that they stopped a domino early, just held it back. And they've been trying to keep this system going ever since. What happened in Europe and in Ireland was sort of similar. They're trying to hold back to stop these dominoes going off in all directions. What they're worried about if Ireland defaults is you have rolling defaults. It starts hitting German and French banks. But, this is the link between the US and Europe, they're all tied into these other contracts called derivative contracts that are worth 10 to 15 times the amount of the size of the global economy. So that could be, once German banks start collapsing, people have contracts out in those banks, on those banks' debt. They say, if this debt goes bad, we will pay you effectively insured. That's one type of derivative. So if the American bank goes bad, somebody says, I have derivative contracts on those, Deutsche Bank, for instance, I want my money, I'm after losing 300 million euros. Then, whoever made that contract, think of them as a type of insurer, has to say, oh, I've given you 300 million. What we're pretty sure of is, those people don't have those 300 million. What they'll have to do is start fire sailing and dropping prices down, and we'll start to find this spiral in US bank balance sheets and European ones, and then it won't matter that Ireland got rid of our bond debt, because the economy, global economy, will have fallen off a cliff, and we are interlinked. This thing starts falling off a cliff, the body, so the finger starts to go, okay? So this is our problem. Lots of risks, lots of threats, and as I see it, we are now in a real-time world of increasing risk Big risk. Not little risk. Big risk where government and governments lose control of their ability to direct affairs. Big risks of how societies respond to these risks. So I expect mass unemployment, really mass unemployment. I expect supply chains breaking down, bank runs, all of these things. And there's no magic solution. If you have the best government in the world, with the wisest people, they won't keep this thing up. Because no amount of wisdom or wise things at this stage can make highly concentrated low entropy energy, or can make deserts fertile with a sort of wand waving. What we have to do, I think, is start to realize that we're coming into a crisis. We don't have a solution. There's no way out. We're in a predicament. It's not there. It's not a solution to be solved. We're in a predicament. And that we were walking into this, not for the last few years, or since we joined the euro or whatever. This was almost written in when, we started growing more and more complex, growing, and drawing in more resources and becoming dependent on them. And we barely noticed that we were becoming dependent on them because so many good things and exciting things came out of it. Our holidays, our trips, and the interesting lives we can live now in terms of careers, all of that came out of it. But we need to realize how vulnerable we are now. If I turned off Ireland's supply chains tomorrow, how would I do that? Financial crisis would be a really good way to do it. Okay, because nobody trusts somebody's, we're either going in, we're probably going to get deflation before we ever get hyperinflation, or multiple currencies, but basically people become more and more uncertain about money, or banks start not to trust each other. If we shut down, it would mean our food supply would probably dry up in about 3 days. Actually, if people panicked, it could dry up in a day. Because that's what we have in the system. We say we're an agricultural country, but that food isn't here in the system, and we can't just run off into the countryside pulling cows out of fields. If we do that, just taking them, well, you're into a situation where, well, how if you just steal farmers' capital are they meant to invest for next year's food production, which is likely to be even more curtailed. So we have this complex set of risks, and many of our expectations are about to be rudely disturbed. And it is absolutely reasonable to be worried and frightened. Now, the reason I say that is if humans didn't have fear, we wouldn't be here. Fear is nature's way of telling us to get proactive. If fear didn't work, we wouldn't be here. If we didn't have fear, we wouldn't be here. Fear is all right, but it doesn't take you all the way or where we need to go. The interesting thing, I think, is that over these years, as these warnings have been given, people have responded. Not governments, by and large. Governments tend to be the most risk-averse, the most likely to be conservative in terms of their worldview and admitting and absorbing new information and new ideas. But it's actually been with ordinary members of the public, people like myself and yourselves. There are transition towns and transition initiatives, and there are people involved in food security, like Irish seed savers, who are becoming, who've always said, not having genetic diversity of seeds poses a risk. But even for transition towns, etc., there is an awareness now, or a growing awareness, that, do you know what? The scale of what's approaching will not be dealt with by transition towns alone. If in the next 5 years, which I think is really likely, we start to see major structural collapses, we will not be able to feed ourselves. We will probably have mass unemployment with major social disorientation, and we've got to learn how to go through this. We've got to start working now, but who do we ask? Who's going to lead this? Who's going to get involved? I think the members of the public have already done that. They're already doing it now. They're amongst you, they're around you. And it really needs a huge collective effort. Now, we've been saying, like in Feasta, some of these things for quite a few years, and we end up, now, not all of them are, some of them are a little more optimistic than I, so I won't claim to speak for everyone, but I'm not alone in